A U.S. research institution study has found out that America is actually the largest recipient of Chinese loans globally, despite warning other economies of the dangers of taking such financing. Well, the report from AidData Research Lab says that it is part of a broader shift in China's lending portfolio away from developing nations and into high-income countries. Toni Waterman files this report for CNA from Washington.
LNG projects in Texas and Louisiana, data centers in Northern Virginia, new terminals at New York's JFK Airport and Los Angeles International Airport. These are just some of the critical infrastructure projects bankrolled by Chinese state-owned entities. In a new bombshell report, researchers at AidData also found that Beijing helped Chinese firms acquire or buy stakes in high-tech U.S. firms and provided liquidity for a wide array of Fortune 500 companies, including Amazon, Verizon, Tesla, Boeing, Qualcomm, and Halliburton.
We're talking about lending into very sensitive sectors that have been designated as sensitive on national security grounds. So things like AI, defense production, quantum computing, biotechnology, robotics, semiconductors.
Brad Parks is the executive director of AidData. He says Chinese state lenders avoided scrutiny by routing money through offshore shell companies in places like Bermuda or running the money through an international bank syndicate. And it's not just the U.S. The report finds that China bankrolled nearly 10,000 projects and activities in high-income countries between 2000 and 2023, totaling nearly $1 trillion.
I think everyone previously assumed that China's lending operations in wealthy, industrialized countries were small and insignificant, but we discovered the opposite to be true. The share of Beijing's lending portfolio that supports high-income and upper-middle-income countries, it has just skyrocketed from 12% to 76%.
AidData's research shows that shift accelerated a decade ago after Beijing introduced Made in China 2025, a strategic plan to transform the country into a self-sufficient, high-tech manufacturing powerhouse, prioritizing key sectors like semiconductors, biotech, and quantum computing.
Their efforts failed.
William Hennigan is a former White House investment advisor. He says the acquisitions present three main risks: collection of sensitive intelligence, control over critical infrastructure, and an unfair competitive advantage in China's favor.
I think, frankly, the most important type of risk is at a certain point, economic competitiveness and security risk is going to ultimately determine the long-run trajectory and success of one nation versus the other. And when two nuclear powers are competing with one another, conflict is going to play out in the field of economics or technology, not necessarily on the battlefield.
Hennigan says Western governments have traditionally lacked the deep financial expertise needed to catch this kind of statecraft. But he says screening in the U.S. has gotten better in the last decade. If there's a counterbalance to the alarms that this report sets off, it's this. AidData says that many of China's lending operations here in the United States were guided by the pursuit of profit, rather than geopolitical or geoeconomic advantages. For CNA, I'm Toni Waterman in Washington, D.C.
Well, to help us unpack all that data, let's speak with Alejandro Reyes, who joins us from Hong Kong. He's a professor at the Department of Politics and Public Administration at the University of Hong Kong. Well, thanks, Prof, for joining us this evening. Just before we get into the findings, I want to talk about AidData itself. How reliable is it as an independent tracker of China's overseas finance?
No, I think, thank you very much. Happy to join you. I think AidData is widely seen as, a very credible independent source tracking China's overseas finance. It uses recipient country records, corporate filings, and project documents, not Chinese self-reporting. It covers, 33,000 plus projects, I think, across 217 countries or economies. So quite an unmatched scope and methodological rigor. So I think it's a fairly reliable source.
Okay, so now once we accept that data, there is a big contradiction staring at us in the face, right? With the US deeply tied into Chinese credit, even though Washington is warning others about the risks. So with this paradox now, what challenge does that pose for US allies as well as the global financial order?
Well, I think it was alluded to in your report that there's always, nowadays, we live in an age of, the term is economic security is a priority. And what does that actually mean? So, if Chinese financing is coming into these economies, including the United States, it can create dependencies in sensitive sectors. It can potentially create perceived security risks, particularly with regard to sort of infrastructure. If you're looking at ports, power grids, telecoms, digital structures, I mean, these might be seen as a sort of strategic infrastructure that if there were some kind of foreign, it doesn't have to be China, but foreign connection or control of these strategic infrastructure, that there is then, of course, a strategic risk that comes with that. So, it's not necessarily the case that, China is doing something nefarious. From the Chinese perspective, China's just becoming a huge overseas investor, like any country that's accumulated these funds and wants to get a good return. So, it's this shift over 10 years, as noted in your report. It signals a new strategic phase that high-income markets offer lower financial risk and higher strategic payoff. So China may gain access to advanced technology, data infrastructure, energy systems, and major corporates, and indeed can become a tool of influence. But this is China behaving like an economy that's looking out to invest and gain a good return.
Professor, just to push that point a little further, does that now mean that China is gaining more influence, into U.S. regulators' offices, into their boardrooms, especially over the tech sectors and these critical infrastructure sectors you've mentioned, rather than over the traditional Belt and Road borrowers that we've seen?
Right. Well, I mean, if you think about Belt and Road, you're talking more about China investing in developing economies. You're talking more about sort of traditional ODA, overseas development assistance, or investment that is tied to development financing, all of those things that sort of we traditionally think as assistance, aid, or lending for development. But here, you're talking about something completely different. This is, I mean, while it might come under this data set that the AidData has accumulated, it's not really aid. I don't, it shouldn't really be considered aid. But it comes under this. The data is accumulated because we're talking about state-supported outward investment, industrial technological partnership financing, commercial credit flows. So that's why it's in this data set. But yes, I mean, I think it's it then behooves the host country, and I think we've seen this in the United States, certainly in Trump 1.0 administration, Biden administration, a greater need by the United States.
Professor, I mean, part of what makes this so hard to track, I want to highlight, is the way the money moves, right? I mean, the report highlights that these Chinese state banks, they are routing money through Bermuda, Cayman Shells, and through all these big international bank syndicates. What do you think is the most worrying part of that bit to you?
Well, I mean, there's that case that created some controversy a few years ago, where this insurer, Right USA, that had a lot of CIA employees in their roles, and a Chinese company purchased this company. And now that was spotted, and then the purchase was reversed. But therein lies the issue: is can a country like the United States and any other country that is worried about its economic security, does it have the infrastructure and the capacity to screen these investments, given whatever strategic goals and security goals and concerns it has? I would say that the United States certainly would have the capacity, but it still has to sort of ramp that up. But certainly for many other countries, if you have, and again, it's not necessarily about China, but if you have a country that you might consider to be an adversary, or a country that might want to take control of critical infrastructure or a critical sector, then you'll have to ramp up your screening processes.
Right, many thanks for your insights there. Really appreciate your time and thoughts. Alejandro Reyes from Hong Kong, a professor at the University of Hong Kong.